The early 1980s were the heyday for malls, with hundreds of people flocking under the neon lights to shop and eat or just hang out with friends on the weekend. Every city had their big mall, the one everyone considered best. For the residents of Fort Myers, Florida, the place to be was the Edison Mall. It boasted dozens of stores, an air-conditioned break from the broiling sun, and of course, sales and fun. However, there was also something sinister lurking just beyond the bright lights in the shadows of the parking lot. 17-year-old Mary Opitz accompanied her mother Nancy and her brother on a trip to the mall one cool Friday night. The trio hit the stores, grabbed a few items, and were preparing to head home when they stopped to chat with friends. Mary, tired and hungry, decided to head outside and wait at the car. In a window of less than 15 minutes, she would mysteriously vanish. The only indication she'd even made it outside were the boxes she'd been carrying, left stacked neatly on the trunk. While Nancy immediately knew that someone had taken her daughter, investigators didn't share her sense of urgency. Assuming that this was just another runaway situation, little was done during those vital first hours. It wouldn't be until nearly a month later when another young woman, 18-year-old Mary Hare, vanished from the same mall, the same parking lot, nearly the same space, that the true investigation kicked off and the hunt for a monster began. This is Trace Evidence, episode 161, The Disappearance of Mary Opitz, part 1. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today, we will examine one of the most enduring and haunting unsolved missing persons cases in Florida history, the disappearance of 17-year-old Mary Opitz. Before getting into the case, just a few notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow the show on social media on Twitter @TraceEvPod, Instagram @TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merch, there's a Patreon at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate directly via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donation options, and contact information. You can submit case suggestions through the website or email me directly at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. A family takes a trip to the mall, and one of them doesn't make it home. Brushed off as a runaway, little is done until it happens again to another family. This is episode 161, The Disappearance of Mary Opitz, part 1. As the last beams of fading sunlight were swallowed beneath the horizon, a bitter chill was slowly creeping up onto the western shores. Light winds sailing over the Gulf of Mexico ushered a touch of cold winter to the Sunshine State. Nearly frigid water swept up onto the sand of quiet beaches, vacant in the shadow of a night growing colder by the minute. As darkness descended, street lamps snapped and popped to life, the familiar orange glow pouring down quiet sidewalks and neighborhood streets. A steady stream of red and white moved along Cleveland Avenue as shoppers, one after the next, pulled into the parking lot of the Edison Mall, Fort Myers' most popular destination for locals in a time where malls were a hub for everything. Whether shopping for the best deal or just looking for a place to hang out with friends, there was no resisting the call of those neon lights as they skipped along the polished floors and mingled with the rumbling hush of a Friday night crowd. Different groups moved down the widened passages, veering into different storefronts or rushing towards the food court to grab a snack in place of dinner. Just 30 minutes after the Florida sun took to its slumber, a burgundy Camaro pulled up towards the main entrance, squeezing into a space not far from the JCPenney and Woolworth department stores. 3 doors popped open. The trio made their way towards the main entrance, noting how lucky they were to get such a good parking space on a busy night. The mother led the way, trailed by her 2 children, who weren't really children anymore, but to her, they'd always be her babies. Their little shopping adventure was set to be a fun respite from the quick pace of what had been a busy week, but they never imagined that one of them wouldn't be coming home. After an hour of wandering through the shops, the woman's 17-year-old daughter, Mary, grew weary of the excursion. As the family made their way back around, reversing course and following their path towards the parking lot, they encountered a friend of their mother's. Imagining this conversation might go on for a bit, Mary whirled her green eyes around towards her mom, Nancy, and explained that she was going to head outside and wait in the car. She was tired and wanted to relax. As she turned to leave, her mother handed her 2 packages, the shirts they had bought a few minutes earlier, and asked her to take them along. The 17-year-old tucked the boxes under her arm and, cradling her pretzels in the other, slowly began walking towards the exit, her brown hair bouncing beneath the varied hues of store lightbox signs as she passed beneath them. No more than 15 minutes later, mother and son spilled out from the air-conditioned mall into a noticeably cooler parking lot, bright lights bathing the pavement in a white aura that skipped like a stone along windshields and side mirrors. At first, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but when they reached the Camaro, they immediately knew something was wrong. The bag of pretzels Mary had been snacking on, and the 2 boxes she'd been asked to take with her, were sitting neatly on the trunk, but there was no trace of Mary beyond that. Spinning around beneath the bright lights, the 2 called out her name, and when that failed to yield results, they began asking everyone they saw, coming in or going out, if they'd seen the 17-year-old, but none had. As the evening grew darker and colder, worry became panic, and the Fort Myers Police Department was notified. By the time an officer came rolling into the parking lot, less than an hour had passed. He approached the family looking towards the Camaro and asking a series of basic questions. When did you last see her? What was she wearing? Did she have any reason to want to run away? Run away. She didn't run away, Nancy explained. She's missing. She wouldn't just leave like this. Someone must have taken her. Her speech was rapid, her heart was pounding, and despite the cold front settling in, Nancy was sweating as her entire body seemed to be on fire, and the police didn't seem very concerned. This kind of thing happens all the time, they explained. She'll be back home later tonight. Probably ran into some friends and decided to go to a party. They'd look for her, of course, and file the report, but they expected Nancy would hear from her daughter before the ink had even dried. Runaways often come home, not realizing how hard it is out there on their own. There was that word again, runaway. Mary didn't run away. Nancy was livid. Her daughter was missing and the police chalked it up to a teenager running off on her own for no good reason. That assumption held up for what seemed like an eternity, 20 long days and nights. Then, another woman mysteriously vanished, leaving her unlocked car behind within just a few feet of the same parking space at the same mall. Her name was Mary too, and no one in her life believed she'd have run away either. It was no longer a question of what happened, but instead, what monster was stalking the mall parking lot, looking for lone women in the night. Mary Opitz was born on Friday, December 13th, 1963, to parents Nancy and William in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. The baby of the family, Mary was the youngest child born to Nancy and William, having 3 older siblings. Born in Brookhaven Memorial Hospital, Mary was raised in the family home on Cypress Drive in Mastic Beach, a town in the southeastern section of Brookhaven Township set on the south shore of the island. A small and quiet community at the time, Mastic and its surrounding areas would experience a population explosion throughout the 1960s, with many Long Island towns seeing residents increasing in upwards of 600%. Not a great deal of information is available about Mary's early years, though she has been described as being the heart of her family, always joking and smiling. Had anyone ever been a little down, Mary always went out of her way to try and cheer them up, wanting to make everyone as happy as she could. She was an active youngster and, according to her mother, loved riding her bike, roller skating, swimming, dancing, and could often be found tossing the frisbee. Her interest in the outdoors and being active would stick with her throughout her life, as would her persona as a fun-loving, happy-go-lucky teen. At the same time, she was a force to be reckoned with. Smart and strong, she stood her ground and made the choices she believed were right, rather than just going with the flow. Tragically, when Mary was just 6 years old, her father William passed away suddenly at the age of 33. A Korean War veteran, he had worked for Grumman, a manufacturer of both military and civilian aircraft on Long Island. Not long after, Nancy made the move south permanent, settling onto the west coast of Florida in Fort Myers. Here, Mary would enter her teenage years, going on to attend Riverdale High School for 2 years. However, prior to entering her junior year, Mary made the decision to drop out of school and instead pick up a job and work towards obtaining her GED. By the time she turned 17 in December of 1980, the family was living in the Hidden Gardens condo complex in the 1500 block of College Parkway. Mary grew closer with her mother as she approached adulthood, with the two forming a solid bond based around mutual respect and friendship. As Nancy would later tell Newsday, quote, "We were always close, the whole family, but I think Mary and I have something special. It was a friendship. We'd go shopping together. We did all sorts of things. She was my youngest. She's the life of the family." End quote. As the year rolled over to 1981, Mary was making plans for the future. She had recently begun a complete overhaul and redecoration of her room at the condo, which she shared with her mother and at least one brother. She'd picked up a job at the nearby Mariner's Inn, a popular lounge in North Fort Myers, and she'd begun saving up for a van she wanted to purchase. Perhaps one of the most exciting events coming on the horizon for the 17-year-old was set to occur in the spring, when she'd have her braces removed. As for any teenager, it was something she desperately was looking forward to. The spring was also when she'd be taking her exam for her GED, and she was cramming in a lot of studying to ensure she passed. Sadly, though, Mary would never get to attend either appointment, as she would mysteriously vanish less than a month after her birthday. The evening of Friday, January 16th, 1981 was a cold one by Florida standards. During the day, temperatures hung in the mid-70s, but as the sun began setting, the numbers dropped rapidly, with lows sweeping in at just over 50 degrees. Mary was off work that night, though she had a paycheck waiting for her, so when Nancy presented the idea of a trip up to the Edison Mall, she was game. Nancy and Mary, along with her brother, climbed into their 1979 Burgundy Chevrolet Camaro and made the short 5-mile drive north on Route 41, Cleveland Avenue. It was a straight shot, making a right turn off Cleveland and into the massive parking lot that encircled the mall. Nancy lucked out, finding a spot in a well-lit area of the lot right next to the main entrance, which at the time was flanked by JCPenney and Woolworth. According to Nancy, they arrived at approximately 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes after sunset. Mary was dressed well, as she almost always was, sporting a brown velveteen jacket over a white top, blue jeans, and brown pumps. Her dark hair, wavy with hints of red, fell to just below her shoulders, contrasting against her hazel eyes. At the time, she was trying to be good with her money, having saved up $300 so far. She didn't want to fall into the trap of spending needlessly, and so she left her purse behind at home, going along more for something to do than to actually get in any shopping. The trio entered the mall via Woolworth, the store they were most closely parked to, and began making their way through. It was busy. It was a Friday night in 1981 when malls were king, and different groups came from all over town to hang out, shop, and eat. Mary found herself getting a little hungry too, and asked her mother for some change to grab a snack. She returned with a sack of pretzels. Over the course of the hour the three were in the mall, they'd visited several different stores, picking up a few items. Whether it was the size of the crowd, the walk through the large building, or just lingering sleepiness, Mary told her mother she was starting to feel tired. They'd be heading home soon, having already reversed course to make their way back to the car. At that time, They ran into a friend of Nancy's and the two began chatting. Not wanting to stand around waiting for the conversation to end, Mary decided to head out to the car by herself. Nancy told her they'd only be a few more minutes, and then the 17-year-old scooped up her pretzels in 2 boxes, shirts Nancy had purchased, and started her way back towards Woolworth and the parking lot. According to Nancy, the last time they saw Mary was at approximately 7:30 p.m. The exact time which passed between Mary leaving the mall and her mother and brother exiting to the parking lot has been the source of some debate. While some reports state they didn't come out until at least an hour later, Nancy herself has said the maximum amount of time that could have passed would have been 15 minutes, with her tending to lean closer to it being just 5 minutes. This would have them walking into the parking lot sometime between 7:35 and 7:45, depending upon where in that 15 minutes the actual truth lies. At the time, the parking lot had a lot of well-lit areas, and some which were darker and more foreboding, but Nancy had parked right near some of the bright lights, which made it evidently clear that something was off when mother and son saw the Camaro, but no sign of Mary. It appeared as though Mary had gotten to the car. The 2 boxes she'd carried along with her bag of pretzels were sitting on the trunk as though she just placed them down a moment earlier. However, there was nothing else, nothing to suggest where she might have gone. One thing was pretty clear. It wouldn't make sense for the 17-year-old to have left the merchandise and her snack behind if she was planning on walking off somewhere nearby. Even if only to run back into the mall to use the restroom, she still would have taken her items with her. Nancy and her son began looking around the parking lot to see if they could find Mary, to see if anyone had seen her, but no one had. They moved back into the mall and looked around asking anyone if they had seen Mary, calling out her name, but again, there was no trace of her. When it became clear that Mary wasn't coming back, Nancy immediately notified the Fort Myers Police Department, but their response did not equal her concern. Officers arrived and took a full missing persons report, but it was clear from the get-go that there wasn't a lot of belief in an abduction from an investigative standpoint. This was still the era of believing all disappearances under a certain age were likely related to runaways, and there was almost a dismissive attitude about it. Nancy was panicked, scared, worried about what might have happened to her child, and instead of seeing any real concern or plans, she instead received assurances that Mary would probably call her soon and had either gone off with friends or just chose to go off on her own. To Nancy, that made no sense at all, as she told the Fort Myers News Press, quote, "She's not a runaway. There were no problems at home. She was happy. She was planning on redecorating her room. She had $300 in the bank. She was planning to buy a van." End quote. At the time of her disappearance, Mary wasn't carrying any money. She didn't even have her purse, and she had no additional clothes with her for what was going to be a cold night. The idea of her deciding randomly that she was taking off made no sense, and if she had, why would she have left everything behind on the trunk? Instead, Nancy found herself that night placing calls to family, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, anyone she could think of, but no one had seen or heard from Mary. Over the course of the next 20 days, little progress was made, if any, and few notices were posted regarding Mary's disappearance. Nancy later told NBC that more than 2 weeks after her daughter had vanished, she visited the Lee County Sheriff's Office to discuss the case, having grown frustrated with the Fort Myers police. It was at that time she learned that her daughter hadn't even been added to the official missing children's list, and the Sheriff's Department and all other departments in the state were unaware. Sadly, it would take a disturbing repeat before Mary's case would be handled with any sense of seriousness. 20 days passed, a long period of frustration, sadness, and anger for Nancy and her family. With each passing day, it seemed the distance between them and Mary only grew broader, with no reports, no contact, no anything about where the 17-year-old could be. Then, it happened again. The evening of Wednesday, February 11th, was a bit warmer than it had been the month before, but locals still found the overnight temperatures a bit too chilly for casual dress. 18-year-old Mary Elizabeth Hare, a student at nearby Edison Community College, was at her family's home in the 3300 block of North Key Drive, 5 miles north of the Edison Mall. Mary Elizabeth, as I'll refer to her to help avoid confusion, was in the middle of folding laundry freshly pulled from the dryer when she glanced towards the clock and noticed the time. She had to get going. She was picking up her mother from work that night, and she didn't want to be late. She called out to her father, Donald, and let him know she was going. Mary Elizabeth pulled out her keys and unlocked the driver's side door of her 1973 black and green Buick LeSabre. As she settled into the driver's seat, her father came walking out carrying a jacket. It was a cool night, and he wanted Mary Elizabeth to stay warm, but she assured him she wouldn't need it. It was a 10-minute drive, and she'd just be waiting in the car. She waved as she slowly drove off, her father never imagining he'd never see her again. It was 8:30 p.m., and sometime during the next 30 minutes, Mary Elizabeth would disappear under strikingly similar circumstances to Mary Opitz. Mary Elizabeth had a familiarity with the Edison Mall. She held a part-time job there at Lerner's department store, which made things easy most nights, as her mother, Muriel, was employed at the Woolworth, and carpooling was always an option. Assuming Mary Elizabeth didn't encounter a great deal of traffic that night, she would have pulled into the mall parking lot between 8:40 and 8:45, leaving her with 15 to 20 minutes to kill before Woolworth closed at 9. Much like Nancy, she found a good spot in a well-lit area just outside the main entrance. What exactly occurred during this time is unknown, but when Muriel came walking into the parking lot at 9:05, the car was there, but Mary Elizabeth was gone. Assuming she may have gone into the mall for a moment, Muriel walked towards the car and waited. Then she realized something that was very out of the ordinary. It was unlocked. According to her parents, Mary Elizabeth never left the car unlocked, not even when it was parked at home, and her keys were missing as well. Something was clearly wrong. For the second time in a month, the Fort Myers police received a panic call about a missing woman from the parking lot of the Edison Mall. As had previously been the case, the car was in working order, there didn't appear to be any signs of a struggle, and as you might imagine, the initial theory was that Mary Elizabeth had run away too. Apparently, if you're planning to run away in Florida, you always have to abandon your car at a mall from which your mother is going to come out any minute. Donald, though, wasn't having any of that. As a former police officer himself with 22 years on the job in the Nassau County Police Department on Long Island, he knew this wasn't a runaway situation, and beyond all of his job experience, he knew his daughter. Mary Elizabeth had a paycheck waiting for her at work, and she was expecting a $400 tax return in the mail any day. She was a college student who held a job and had never expressed any interest in running away, and as Donald later put it, she didn't have to. She was 18. If she wanted to go off on her own, they couldn't stop her, but you'd imagine she might have taken her car with her. Something else was happening here, and the eerie similarities between both women's disappearances didn't go unnoticed. The manner in which the two women vanished was only the beginning of a bizarre string of similarities between them, which began to make people wonder if they had been specifically targeted, or if perhaps this might have been a situation of mistaken identity. Both women stood within 1 inch of another, Mary at 5'4" and Mary Elizabeth at 5'5". There was a 5-pound difference between them, 110 and 105 respectively. Both had brown hair to just past their shoulders and hazel eyes. Mary Elizabeth was a year older at 18 and lived 5 miles north of the mall, while Mary lived 5 miles south of it. Curiously, both women had spent the early parts of their life on Long Island, with Mary in Mastic Beach and Mary Elizabeth in Wantagh, 40 miles to the west across the Nassau County line, and as a result, both spoke with a subtle Long Island accent. I'm not sure what that sounds like, but I'm told I have it. While Mary was employed at the Mariner's Inn, Mary Elizabeth was known to frequent that location, having friends who docked a boat there. Both had disappeared in a small window of time with their mothers inside the mall. Both were wearing jeans. Both left their car behind, and neither had any money on them. No one was sure if the two missing women had known each other. It was reported early on that they'd attended the same high school for a period of time, though it appears they didn't know each other there. Mary Elizabeth frequented Mary's job location, and while they may have encountered one another, there didn't appear to be any friendship connection. Ultimately, it was determined that both women lived in, worked in, and hung out in the same general area, but if they did know one another, it was likely on a little more than an acquaintance basis, exchanging waves or hellos, but little else. Fort Myers detectives Stu Jennings and Ron Baroni were put in charge of the cases, working to try and establish any link between the two missing Marys, but outside of some overlap in their lives, they didn't find much. Fairly rapidly, rumors began circulating around town about a gang allegedly abducting women from the area and forcing them into sex work down in Miami, but investigators dismissed this early on, with Baroni telling the news press there was no evidence of such a gang operating in the area, adding, quote, "We checked with Miami, and they don't know anything like that either," end quote. They were also quick to dispel a rumor about a duo of men who abducted victims from the mall while dressed like women, as again, there was no evidence to support that theory. None of their attempts, however, would stop the rumor mill from continuing to churn out crazier, more exaggerated theories every few days. Sergeant Jennings revealed that, in the weeks between the disappearances, police had received several reports of a man following women around the mall parking lot, claiming to be a photographer and asking young women if they were interested in posing for nude photos, proving once again that cell phones, while expanding the reach of perverts, surely was not the origin of this kind of atrocious behavior. The most recent report police had received came in on Sunday, February 8th, just 3 days prior to Mary Elizabeth's disappearance. A week earlier on Sunday, January 25th, 9 days after Mary's disappearance, a woman called 911 to report a sexual assault. As she had left the Edison Mall that night, a man had approached her vehicle and forced her inside. He then drove her to a secluded area near the airport and sexually assaulted her. Investigators managed to capture the man, identified as 16-year-old Kelly Sanders, though there didn't appear to be a link between his attack and the women's disappearances, as he had been in jail when Mary Elizabeth vanished. While the mall had upped security in the aftermath of Mary's disappearance, they were on patrol on the other side of the parking lot when Sanders struck. Police began looking towards criminals with a similar MO to the two disappearances, and the name of John Warren Eddings was considered for a time. Eddings, originally from Illinois, had kidnapped 3 women from the Edison Mall 3 years earlier in 1978. He took the women to Pine Island, where he tied them up, robbed them, and left them. He was arrested and charged with multiple kidnappings and robbery charges, resulting in a sentence of 90 years. On December 22, 1980, he managed to escape, abducting 2 doctors in a span of the same amount of days, though both were later released unharmed. While there was no evidence tying Eddings to the disappearances, he surely was someone police wanted to speak to, if they could find him. The likelihood was slim, though, that he would have still been hanging around the Fort Myers area some 25 days after his escape when Mary was taken. Beyond that, police had little they were working with, as Sergeant Jennings later told the news press, quote, "Basically, it comes down to the fact that there is no evidence of a violent crime, there are no witnesses to say there was an abduction, there is no crime scene to investigate. There's 2 girls missing who look alike, and right now, that's all we've got." End quote. In response to the second apparent abduction, the mall again increased security and initiated an escort program to walk women out to their cars during the night. The lights in the parking lot, which typically turned off at 10 p.m., were changed to stay on until 10:30. Mall management purchased a truck to allow security guards to patrol the parking lot more efficiently, and they requested local police make frequent passes through the lot during the evening hours. Missing persons flyers were put up in the mall and outward-facing storefronts, and several stores began pooling money to create a reward for information about either or both Marys. In the days following Mary Elizabeth's disappearance, locals were growing fearful of going to the mall at night, never knowing who might be lingering in the parking lot. However, while it seemed everyone understood what was going on, Fort Myers Police Captain Elvin R. Washburn chimed in with what I can only describe as a statement that is as frustrating as it is naive. Speaking to the news press, Captain Washburn explained, quote, "We've gotten a lot of calls, but there's still no evidence that a crime has been committed. The mall is not a high crime rate area for the number of people who pass through, and it's not a crime to be a missing person. They are both still at that young, compulsive age. I've convinced myself that, out of the clear blue, one of these girls is going to return home or contact her parents. I really think that's going to happen." End quote. In the absence of what he would have preferred to have been a strong, direct, and aggressive search for his daughter, Donald Hare decided to take matters into his own hands, to some degree. In addition to offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to the women's safe return, he had more than 200 flyers of his daughter printed up and began distributing them at the mall. He also called several retired law enforcement officers in the area, and together, they canvassed the mall, questioning employees and shoppers who were present on the day both women disappeared. He then visited police departments all over the state to ensure that they knew of the crimes. He later explained to the Miami Herald, quote, "I'll give the police as much time as they need, but if they don't solve it, I'll do it myself. Knowing from experience how the police handle missing persons cases, I began to search for her immediately." End quote. By the end of March, 2.5 months after Mary disappeared, and a month and a half after Mary Elizabeth, investigators hadn't made much progress. They'd received calls and tips, though none had panned out. Police had received messages from inmates looking to bargain information for a break, but again, none of those leads produced results either. At one point, a so-called psychic even came down to the department and wrote extensive notes, but there was nothing helpful in them. Yet still, after this passage of time, Captain Washburn stuck to his guns, noting that they had no evidence of a crime in either case, and it was still possible they might have left of their own will. Both Nancy and Donald were direct and blunt with their beliefs that their daughters had been abducted. Washburn, however, when asked by reporters from the news press about the possibility of abductions, replied, quote, "I think there would have been some kind of a struggle. Somebody should have seen something." End quote. 2 months later, any belief that either young woman would just be popping up out of the blue was washed away when an elderly couple made a grisly discovery. At approximately 3 p.m. on Saturday, May 30th, an elderly couple out collecting rocks stumbled upon a body near Lehigh Acres, an unincorporated area 16 miles to the east of the Edison Mall. Upon being notified, deputies of the Lee County Sheriff's Office responded to the area near the intersection of Southwest 46th Street and Elva Avenue. The body, found lying face down in a sandy field, was that of a white female approximately 4 feet 11 inches in height with reddish-brown hair. She was found clothed in a lavender long-sleeve knit sweater and green Levi corduroy jeans. A pair of brown suede walking shoes were lying nearby, and the victim wore a broken necklace with a gold heart. She was believed to be in her teens or early 20s. An autopsy conducted the following day was unable to determine the cause of death due to decomposition, though it was estimated the woman had been dumped there sometime in the previous 2 months. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no broken bones, no bullet wounds. Dental records were to be utilized to determine the woman's identity, and in the meantime, searches were being conducted on land and by air for additional clues or evidence in that area. At the time, investigators were unsure if this could be one of the missing Marys, though they didn't want to speculate much one way or the other until they received test results and were able to access each of the missing women's dental records. The tragic news came out 3 days later when dental records confirmed they had found the remains of Mary Elizabeth Hare. Mary Elizabeth's parents were devastated by the news, though they had been expecting a dark outcome. Mary Elizabeth's mother Muriel told the news press, quote, "I've known she was dead right from the beginning. I don't know how I knew, but I've always known. The police came and said it was Mary, that there had been a positive identification. One problem is over now. We know where Mary is. I'd gotten to the point I didn't know what to pray for anymore. I didn't know whether to even pray for her to even still be alive." End quote. Due to the discovery of Mary Elizabeth's remains and her case becoming a homicide investigation, both Mary's cases were handed over to the Lee County Sheriff's Office, who would now take the lead, and I don't think either family was disappointed in losing the help of the Fort Myers Police Department. While the Hare family was struggling to accept this bitter twist of fate, Nancy was now confronting the dark possibilities regarding her own daughter. She tried to remain positive, though, believing that until they could prove to her otherwise, her daughter was still alive out there somewhere. She told the news press, quote, "Even the police are thinking they're probably going to find another body out there, but they haven't yet. And until they do, until I know something for sure, I'm going to keep on hoping. My heart aches for the Hares, for I know what they must be going through today. I asked if there was anything I could do. They would have done the same for me. Now they face a different kind of nightmare. Who killed Mary and why? I feel so bad for them." End quote. Mary Elizabeth's remains were examined by Professor of Anthropology Dr. William Maples of the University of Florida in hopes that he might be able to determine a cause of death. Dr. Maples was able to locate marks on some of her bones, ultimately determining that she had been stabbed at least twice. Due to decomposition, it couldn't be determined whether or not Mary Elizabeth had been the victim of sexual assault, though investigators believe there was a high likelihood, noting that the killer is believed to be sexually motivated. Back in Lehigh Acres, more than 20 officers were continuing search efforts within the site of Mary's remains. The search utilized helicopters as well as mounted officers in jeeps and trucks to comb the area, described as being made up of sandy scrub brush and thickets of palmettos, or as one officer put it, 1,000 miles of nothing. While they couldn't yet confirm that both Marys had been victims of the same perpetrator, they believed there was a chance they might find another body out there. The search would last 5 long days before being discontinued, without any further evidence or remains being discovered. Sheriff Frank Vanica later described the site by saying, "If you had 5 years, you still couldn't cover all of it." In hopes of developing leads, sheriff's investigators began questioning prisoners across the state who had committed similar crimes. One in particular drew their attention, as he had abducted women from shopping malls. On Thursday, June 4th, sheriff's homicide investigators were able to sit down and speak with Ronald Eugene Terry, who had operated in the Sarasota area, 80 miles north of Fort Myers. After several successful assaults, Terry had attacked a woman at a mall and attempted to abduct her, but she fought back. Terry ended up stabbing the woman and fleeing in a car, but the woman was able to give a partial plate, leading to his arrest, at which time previous victims identified him as their assailant. During questioning, Terry allegedly made some admissions about the attacks in the Sarasota and Bradenton areas, but outright denied any connection to the Edison Mall abductions. Terry was asked to take a polygraph and agreed. According to investigators, he passed with flying colors, leading them to believe that he likely wasn't their suspect. He was, at the time, awaiting trial on 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of sexual battery, and 1 count of aggravated battery. On Saturday, July 18th, there was another attack at the Edison Mall, though this one led to an arrest. 21-year-old Norman Peters was charged with attempted sexual battery and burglary. At approximately 9 p.m., he approached a woman as she got into her car asking for directions. Once close enough, he forced his way into the car, attempting to sexually assault her, but she managed to fight him off. Investigators didn't believe this was the man responsible for Mary's disappearance and Mary Elizabeth's murder, but he was questioned all the same. Unfortunately, now more than 6 months had passed since the first abduction, and leads were growing thin, with few developments throughout the rest of the year. There wouldn't be a new angle to follow until more than a year after the abduction and murder, when in February of 1982, Nancy saw a woman on TV who bore a striking resemblance to her missing daughter. It was a quick flash, a little more than a second of screen time, but it was enough for Nancy to believe her daughter could be alive. NBC had run a program about a proposal to give Puerto Rico statehood status, and in the background, difficult to see unless you were looking, was a young woman who looked like Mary. Nancy notified the sheriff's office, who in turn received a copy of the video from NBC for analysis. It was difficult to make out, but there was no doubt the resemblance was there. As Nancy told the news press, quote, "I saw this girl walking on the street in this program. It looks like her. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth, everything. I would say it was her, but I don't want to get my hopes up in case it wasn't. She just looked like she was walking in a daze." End quote. Lieutenant Wallace reached out to the police in San Juan, explaining the situation to them. A copy of the tape was sent to Detective Irving Lugo, who stated that he knew the area where the video had been filmed, and if Mary was there, he'd find her. Wallace explained that should anything develop, he would be heading down to Puerto Rico himself. When asked about why they were chasing this lead, which by some accounts was a little out of the ordinary, Wallace replied, quote, "The Opitz case is always with us, but she's listed as a missing person. We have no suspects in the Hare murder and no leads in the Opitz disappearance, but we never quit trying. We never quit asking questions." End quote. Unfortunately, it seems the Puerto Rico lead never evolved. While investigating another disappearance, that of Tina Beebe, investigators came upon an interesting connection. Beebe, a sex worker active in the drug trade, vanished the same day her then boyfriend, Harvey Michael McElroy, was murdered. McElroy had been involved in criminal activities for most of his life, last being a mid-level enforcer for a Miami-based gang heavily involved in drug trafficking. While his reputation for enjoying his work made him a useful tool, at some point, he got on the wrong side of his superiors. On January 21st, 1981, just 5 days after Mary's disappearance, McElroy was murdered with a gunshot wound to the head. He was then set on fire and was still smoldering when police arrived. McElroy had an address book on him at the time of his death, partially burned, but police were able to get multiple numbers out of it. One was to a bar called Pete's Hangover, located at 5400 South Cleveland, 2 miles south of the Edison Mall, 2 miles north of Mary's home. According to the Fort Lauderdale News, McElroy had an acquaintance named Robert Hoop, and he had met Beebe through him. As it turns out, Hoop also knew both Marys. When questioned, he acknowledged knowing both women as well as McElroy, but stated that he had no knowledge of who was involved in their crimes. Pembroke Pines Police Sergeant John Stanton later explained to the news press, quote, "We know Bob Hoop knew both girls. Loosely put, Opitz, Hare, and Tina were all teenagers in the same town. They went to the same place, and they knew the same people. Whether the three knew each other, we don't know. The substantial link is they all three knew Hoop." End quote. While this was initially believed to be a solid connection, it didn't hold up over time. Nancy acknowledged her daughter had gone to the bar once or twice, but not yet being of legal drinking age, she certainly didn't hang out there. Donald Hare confirmed that Mary Elizabeth knew Hoop, but he didn't know anything more about the bar or its connections. Regulars at the bar reported being familiar with McElroy and Hoop, but none could confirm having seen either woman at the bar. While Pembroke police thought they were on to something, Both the Broward and Lee County Sheriff's Offices stated they didn't think either Mary's disappearance or Mary Elizabeth's murder were connected to McElroy and the gang. Neither was involved in the drug trade, neither knew McElroy, and neither had any connections to anyone else associated with the gang. Robert Chandler, a leader of the gang, escaped from prison shortly after McElroy's murder. When he was recaptured in September of 1982, investigators questioned him about the two Marys, but he gave no information and claimed not to know either woman. When discussing the drug gang, smuggling, and the violence associated with it and how it could tie into the crimes, Lieutenant Wallace told the news press, quote, "We feel, based on our investigation, that the Hare murder was a sex crime. Opitz disappeared in the same manner as Hare, but she's listed as missing. Based on what I know of the McElroy case, it was a drug-related murder on the East Coast and not related in any way to our investigation in the Hare murder." End quote. As of yet, no evidence has ever been found tying either Mary to any of the gang members nor to the drug trade itself. It all appears to have been circumstantial and connected through Robert Hoop, though what information he might possess beyond what is known about the crimes has yet to be established. Another long year would pass, with no developments. As of October of 1983, nearly 3 years after the crimes, Lieutenant Wallace noted there were 33 open missing persons cases in Lee County. 3 were related to non-custodial parent abductions. 29 were determined to be runaways. That left only one, the disappearance of Mary Opitz, as the sole disappearance where foul play was definitely suspected. Asked about the two cases, Mary's disappearance and Mary Elizabeth's murder, Lieutenant Wallace stated that they did believe there was a connection regardless of an absence of evidence. He told the news press, quote, "We definitely feel the cases are related. The girls strongly resembled each other. It happened in the same area at approximately the same time. There were many similarities in the two cases. Sexual offenders are repeat offenders. They don't commit a murder or murders and then just suddenly get well. They only stop when they are arrested or they die." End quote. In late October, investigators questioned notorious serial killer Otis Toole about the case. Toole, who was in the state at the time, claimed to have no knowledge of either Mary, and investigators for the most part believed that to be legitimate. It wasn't really Toole's style. It didn't have the same signatures. But since he had been in the area and was a murderer, they wanted to cover all their bases. While Toole had been a necessary piece of the puzzle to either include or rule out, there was another serial killer who caught the attention of investigators, both for his whereabouts during the crimes and his typical approach to victims. Soon, he would capture the attention of the entire country. A brutal, violent, and sadistic killer was now entering the fray. An Australian national with dual citizenship, a millionaire with a flair for race cars and photography. He lived in South Florida and was in the state when both Marys were attacked. He was a man of many parts, but the most powerful of those was the cold-blooded monster at his core. You may know him as the Snapshot Killer or the Beauty Queen Killer, but his real name is Christopher Bernard Wilder.
My name is Chris Wilder. Been in Florida approximately 11 years, originally from Sydney, Australia. I want to date. I want to socially meet and enjoy the company of a number of women.
Next week, in part 2 of The Disappearance of Mary Opitz, we'll examine Wilder's bloody history and his final nationwide murder spree, as well as the investigation into both Mary's cases over the decades and the many theories which have been purported in the now 40 years since Mary Opitz vanished and Mary Hare was murdered. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at TraceEvPod, message me on Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, or comment in the Facebook group. Trace Evidence would not be possible without support from amazing listeners like you. And now I'd like to take a moment to thank our fantastic Patreon producers: Alicia Lorraine, Anne Bertram, Aurora K, Bacon Bits the Cat, Brittany Bivens, Christine Greco, Krista Colvin, Dave Allen, Denise Dingsdale, Diane Dyson, Eric Sumter, Guillermo Pinto, Heather Louise, James, Jen Trebb, Jennifer Winkler, Joni Berkowitz, Kara Moreland, Marla Wright, Melissa Brackeisen, Nick Mohar Schurz, Orange Patches, Quinn McBreen, Roberta Jansen, Sarah Levonin, Sarah Mascaritolo, Sarah Lyons, Travis Skepko, Stephanie Joyner, Stephanie Eve, Tom Archer, Tom Radford, Tracy Woods, and Walter Jansen. Your contributions to Trace Evidence are invaluable, and your support of the show is both appreciated and extremely humbling. If you're interested in supporting Trace Evidence and gaining access to exclusive merch and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence or go to trace-evidence.com and click on the support option. That's going to conclude this week's episode. If you haven't already, please consider rating the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. 5 stars would be greatly appreciated, but it's up to you. Share these episodes, spread the word, and maybe together we can help bring justice to those who have been deprived of it. Thank you all once again for listening, supporting the show, and for being the best listeners a podcaster could ask for. That's going to wrap up part 1 for this week. Make sure you check back next week for part 2 of the disappearance of Mary Opitz. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me next week for another episode of Trace Evidence.